Hi, this is Gary, and this is my friend, a styrofoam head. Another styrofoam head. I'm going to use these two styrofoam heads to help you understand aperture priority mode. The first thing is in aperture priority mode, you take your mode wheel on a Canon camera. This is Canon. You set your mode wheel to AV. On Nikon, it's A, and I believe just about every other manufacturer is A. When you dial in A or AV on Canons, you're telling your camera that you're going to set the aperture, the size of the lens opening. And the camera takes care of everything else. That's really all we need to know for now. This all has to do with exposure. So basically, if you just try and keep in mind that all you're doing, or all the camera's doing, all this is really about is letting a certain quantity of light to get inside the camera. It's just like, you know, in low light, it's harder for us to see than in bright light. Okay, same thing with the camera. No light, no picture. The thing that you have to know about aperture priority mode is we have these numbers. They're called f-stop numbers, and they are actually the problem. Well, we have these bizarre numbers. f1.8, what the hell is that? f2, f2.8, f4, f5.6, f8, f11, what? I mean, they don't mean anything, right? Like these numbers, if I were to say, set my camera's f-stop to f1.8, okay, well, what does that mean? If I said, set my shutter speed to 2 seconds, even if you don't know how to do it, you're going to understand that. Well, f-stop numbers, there's no context that makes sense to us. Turns out that these f-stop numbers relate directly to the size of the lens opening. And it turns out that there's a very complicated formula which people much smarter than I am came up with to come up with these f-stop numbers. And here it is. Okay, you know, that makes no sense to me. So probably doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense to you either. But the good news is we don't have to understand that formula. All we have to understand is that these numbers, f1.8, which is the largest aperture that this lens will go to f22, which is the smallest lens opening that this lens will go to. Okay, so this is going to be the head that I focus on. Barbie is going to be slightly in front, and the rear head will be in the rear. So I'm going to be focusing in the middle. And I'm doing that to help explain what depth of field is and how we should be thinking about it. So I'm going to have to hold this up with my hand. And I'm going to shoot at f1.4 to start. My camera will basically make all the settings. The camera's driving the bus. I'm not really doing anything except setting an f-stop number. So once again, f1.8, I hope I said f1.8 just now. I'm setting my camera at f1.8. That is the largest aperture setting, the largest opening that this lens will go to. And it turns out that that will create a narrow depth of field, as you're about to see. So here I'm going to shoot. I'm going to hold Barbie up. This is going to be tough. I got to get all three in the shot. Okay. So I'm setting my focal point on the middle object, and I'm going to shoot. Okay. I got the shot. And now I'm going to change my f-stop number to f8. That's going to make the lens opening smaller than it was at f1.8, actually a lot smaller. So I'll take the same shot, once again, trying to get all three images in the frame, focusing on the middle object. Okay. All right, interesting. Now I'm going to go to f22. Same thing. Oh boy. All right. Well, okay. That'll work. That'll work. Okay. So 3 shots. f1.8, f8, f22. 3 objects. This was where I set my focal point. That becomes very important because where you set your focal point determines the location of your depth of field. So if I set my focal point here, there's a certain amount of area front to back which will also be in sharp focus, okay, or in focus. So I was holding off giving you a definition of depth of field. The definition is this. There's a certain area front to back, you know, front being from the lens to infinity, there's a certain area which we call acceptably sharp. And the reason it's acceptably sharp is because it's not a black or white phenomenon. Depth of field isn't like everything is super sharp inside the depth of field and everything is super blurry outside the depth of field. It's a gradual thing. So I set my focus point right here. The image, the scene is gradually getting softer in the back of my focal point and also softer in front of my focal point, in a gradual way. The depth of field is regulated by the size of the lens opening, and the size of the lens opening is regulated by these bizarre f-stop numbers. For this lens, and it's different for different lenses, and not every lens goes to f1.8. This one does. So I have a range of f-stop settings, f1.8 to f22. Now this prime lens, this 50mm lens, affords a very large range of depth of field, which is why it's such a great lens. This is why it's known as the quote-unquote nifty 50, because you have such a wide range. You can go to f1.8, get a very narrow depth of field, or go to f22, get a very wide depth of field. So aperture priority is all about depth of field. We change our aperture setting to regulate the depth of field, and therefore the character, of the character of our photographs. So you saw at f1.8, the rear styrofoam head was so blurry, it just looked like a white blob. At f22, everything in that scene was sharp. Barbie, middle head, rear head, all of it was acceptably sharp. So, okay, I think that pretty much covers aperture priority. I think I'm going to make like a part 2 to this to explain the whole issue of proximity, the distance from the focal point, because, well, that makes it a little more complicated. Aperture and depth of field are, it's a pretty deep subject. All right, so that's it for now. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.